Let's talk about treasure hunt design. And if we're going to do that, I thought it would be great to go back to the novel that inspired the modern imagination of the treasure hunt. That would be Robert Louis Stevenson, Treasure Island, that he published in the late 19th century. This novel set the stage for what we think of as a treasure hunt today in many ways. There's the treasure map, there's X marks the spot, there's the kind of sequence that happens in a treasure hunt. And by studying these kinds of treasure hunts in books and in films, we can begin to see how modern treasure hunters might be inspired to design their hunts. So it can help you as a designer, but it can also help you as a treasure hunter if you happen to be watching it with that in mind. So this is a story that gives us possibly even an edge as a treasure hunter or a designer. And obviously, subsequent treasure hunts take on different forms and different iterations. But really, the modern Western notion of the treasure hunt comes back to Treasure Island. There were certainly novels from different cultures that involved treasure and a hunt for treasure in different ways that precedes this. But in the Western world, in the contemporary world, this really is the starting point that inspired a lot of the thinking around different aspects of modern treasure hunts. So I'm not going to go through this as a literary analyst. I'm going to go through this as a designer, just looking at some of the design features that we see in Treasure Island. So the first one is the obvious one, the map. It's real, but it's incomplete, meaning that you need to somehow figure out how to interpret the map properly. You're going to need some context that you might not have when you're initially looking at the map. And also, you may need to do some exploring in order to better understand what the map means. So the map might not make sense to you until you're further in the journey or you're literally in a different physical place. And that's a common feature for treasure hunt designs, is that the clue sometimes feels quite simple at a certain stage in the treasure hunt, but at the beginning, it won't make much sense at all. And you have to continue in the journey in order to see that. That's why, for example, many people talk about boots on the ground. You can do all the analyzing you want, but sometimes there may be aspects, clues that aren't going to really click for you, or you're not going to get that affirmation until you get on the ground and you get closer. And so sometimes there will be clues that get you in the broad vicinity and then a little bit closer and then a little bit closer, and it kind of builds that way. There's also, obviously, in a treasure hunt, there's a clear treasure goal, a single physical reward. This one, obviously, buried gold, and one person gets it. And yet, in this novel and in all treasure hunts, including the modern ones, whether intended or really planned out or not, there's always a metaphorical treasure or a series of metaphorical treasures that are necessary. So there are treasures that are received, but in order to get the big treasure, you usually have to develop some new skills, some new ways of looking, some new ways of thinking, some new habits in order to be ready for the next phase. And this is actually true in literary traditions around the world. If you look at Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, that the hero is charged to go on some grand quest, and that hero is not ready for the later part of the quest until building allies and developing some skills and some abilities, receiving some gifts along the way. Those could be seen as metaphorical treasures, the relationships, the skills, the abilities that are needed to go further along the way. So that's a part of it. There's a stage progression. So each piece, there's a map, there's a journey, there's an island, and then there's also a search once you get to the island. So you'll notice that there are these different stages of the treasure hunt where you start and you're just kind of making sense of the map. But you'll never discover the treasure by just looking at the map. You have to begin the journey, and you're never going to get to the island unless you persist on that journey. And you're never going to actually find the treasure unless you start exploring the island. And so these different phases oftentimes almost are like different games where the rules of the game are a little bit different. So what you needed in order to progress to stage 2 is going to be different than what you need to progress to stage 3. That's an important thing to note, that most treasure hunts are designed that way, although there are certainly much simpler treasure hunts where there's a map and a poem and you have to figure out the poem, and if you do, you just go out and you start exploring and then eventually you find it somewhere. And certainly there are simpler designs, but I'm just describing the classic inspiration behind the modern treasure hunt. Thinks about it in terms of these different stages, and realizing that if you just started the treasure hunt at stage 3, it would make no sense to you at all. And if you stayed at stage 1, you'd never get to a place of comprehension or understanding that could lead you to the treasure. There's also, in every treasure hunt and in Treasure Island, there's trust and misinformation. There are people who are going to mislead you, and there are going to be people who can be resources to help you along the journey. And that is maybe by design with some modern treasure hunts, that there is misinformation and deception and redirection. But even when it's not intended by the designer, it's going to become part. And you actually see that with like some of the current treasure hunts that are happening. You'll see people that put misinformation up, and you'll see others that are very generous in offering guidance and support and encouragement. And you have to figure out who your allies are and who the people are that maybe you're going to have to not pay as much attention to if you want to make some progress. And then we get to the other feature, which is obviously geography as a puzzle. And in a lot of classic treasure hunts, including Treasure Island, you have symbolic meanings of names of locations and other things like that. And again, the clues earlier on, until you get there and you see things and you see names of things and you notice landmarks, the earlier clues might not make sense to you. So that's where the puzzle kind of gets involved. And of course, there's a geography where the puzzle is, once you get there, there might be some kind of way in which it's hidden. It could be buried, it could be have things piled up on top of it, it could be blended into other things. And so there's a kind of puzzle in that way. Now, let me just share, and I wanted to keep this one pretty brief, because when I get to some others, when I start analyzing, for example, the treasure hunt design and National Treasure at some point, if I get to that video, that one's a little bit longer, and it's a sequential kind of clue by clue by clue, and it's a really neat design approach to a treasure hunt that can give us some great insights. But this one I'm just keeping a little simpler. So we have the map, we have the clear treasure goal, we have the stage progression, we have the trust and misinformation, and then we have geography as a puzzle. So let me say, here are some takeaways. One, the hunt is revealed in layers. That's how it happens in the book, and that's how it happens in most modern treasure hunts. Now, if you think about a treasure hunt like John Collins Black, where he argues that the book has all the clues that you need in order to get to the treasure hunt. That could mean a couple of different things. It could mean that the book is the starting point and it can lead you to other things outside of the book that will get you to the treasure, or you can take it more literally, which I'm kind of inclined a little bit to do, which is to suggest that the book itself might have the layers in it. So chapter 1 is layer 1, chapter 2, layer 2, and you're instead of physically moving through the different places in a treasure hunt journey like Treasure Island, you might be taken on a significant part of that journey just through the chapters. So you're going to have to gain some knowledge and insight in chapter 1 that you may have to layer on top of the later chapters and put them on top of one another for it to be a strong enough clue to give you an indication of maybe where things might be, where to go, where not to go. And then there may well be getting there and getting closer and getting within the vicinity of the treasure for other later clues to make more sense to you. Now, keep in mind, with the John Collins Black treasure hunt, there are actually 5 treasure hunts. And so the first part of the book is largely pointing to this treasure with the lion's share of the treasures. And then there are standalone chapters in part 2, 4 chapters. And what he's said is that all that you need to find each of those treasures is largely self-contained in that chapter. And so you could think of them as five separate treasure hunts in a way. I don't know yet, and it's yet to be determined how interconnected they are. I would say that there is some kind of overarching theme and broader connection among all of them in some way that might be transparent, because I see that particular designer as a narrative designer. He's a narrative designer. He thinks mythically, he thinks metaphorically, and so I expect to see something that he would like to sort of interconnect them all in some kind of fun and interesting way from a story standpoint or mythology. But we'll see if that's the case. Regardless, the hunt is revealed in layers. That's an important thing to see. And if you're a designer, if you just have a flat treasure hunt, that becomes a little bit boring, less engaging. So next, use place as a part of the puzzle. Keep in mind that physical places can tie to the stories or the maps or the other kinds of clues, the poems. So right, you're layering a poetic line upon another clue that may be layered on top of a physical location. So that layering is a part of a design that's important. And then design has clear phases of what we might almost call play. And the rules of play can change at different phases. And I just note, I don't know if that's part of some of the treasure hunts that are active right now, how much the rules change at different layers and different levels. But in the traditional treasure hunt design, that's common. And so what skills you had to be successful in phase one may or may not be useful in phase two. And yet there might even be a little piece of phase one that you need somewhere later down the road. There's actually in the a Buddhist tradition, there's this story of when you're crossing a river on a raft. Once you get across the river, the raft is no longer, not only is it no longer needed, but it's a hindrance to the next part of the journey, because now you're going to be hiking on foot. So you don't carry that raft on your back any longer. You leave it behind, or maybe you keep a piece of it. Might be something on there that's useful, the rope or something like that, that might be necessary for the next part of the journey. And so similarly in treasure hunt design, what you use to be successful in the first phase may be actually obsolete or even a detriment to the second phase. So just an important design principle that to keep in mind that makes things interesting. And then the characters, the treasure hunters, build the skills in the character along the way. And so they develop what is needed for the next phase of the treasure hunt along the way. That too is at least part of the Treasure Island design. Now, not all of these design features in Treasure Island are necessarily part of a alternate reality game that you're participating in or designing today, or every live treasure hunt that might be active today. But there are some of these principles that certainly inspire the imagination of the designers. So it inspired the designers who came before them. So there's no question that Treasure Island inspired some aspects of the movie Goonies or National Treasure or some of the other films or novels that came after it. That's just sort of the nature of how literature and media works, is stories beget stories over time. And it is valuable to realize that legacy and that tradition, because these are the stories that build a framework of thinking about treasure hunting and treasure hunting design of those who are designing them today. So maybe this gives you a little bit of an edge. It gives you an edge if you want to try your hand at designing some, but maybe if you're one of those treasure hunters, it can be useful as well. And if you're like me, it's also just fascinating to study the nature of treasure hunting and how it taps into something that's really deeply human, that we are designed to be people who seek after truth, beauty, and goodness, as flawed and failing as we are sometimes in that effort. And we are people that are designed to appreciate wonder and mystery and want to resolve mystery. And we want to seek after hidden and unknown truth. And we like to discover. We find ourselves people of adventures and quests. And again, that's part of how we were designed. And so Treasure Island and the modern treasure hunt movement fits very well and taps into something that's deeply human. It goes back to how I believe we were designed to be. All right, that's all I have for you this time. I look forward to your comments, and I'll be trying to do some videos in the future where we unpack some different novels, or I think I'm actually going to do a series of films over time. Although you can get quite detailed, some of those films are very layered and intriguing. All right, that's all I have for you today.